Hi dear friends, I am Dr. Pavitra and today's topic of discussion is weaning from mechanical ventilation. This is the last topic that I will be discussing in the ventilation series that I have been posting for the past few weeks, and let's get started. We'll be looking at some definitions initially, and then we will go step by step as to how we are going to achieve a successful extubation. What is weaning? Weaning is simply the transition from a ventilatory support or a positive pressure support to a complete spontaneous breathing, where the patient is going to assume the complete work of breathing as he or she was doing earlier. Extubation is the process of removal of endotracheal tube, and you call an extubation as successful if the patient is 48 hours on spontaneous breathing without any form of positive pressure support. You call it as a early extubation failure if the patient has the need to be re-intubated within 6 hours of extubation. It's intermediate extubation failure if this re-intubation occurs from 6 to 24 hours post-extubation. And late extubation failure is as that which occurs from 24 to 48 hours of extubation. Spontaneous breathing test and extubation readiness test. Spontaneous breathing test is a subjective determination as to whether the indication for which you ventilated the patient has improved, and will that allow the patient be able to adequately oxygenate and ventilate effectively. And how do you assess that? You assess that by a formal extubation readiness test. Will the patient be able to breathe his or her own after extubation with adequate oxygenation and ventilation? So how are you going to go about it? You first assess to see if the patient is ready to be weaned off. Then you slowly reduce the support that you are giving on a ventilator. Then you can do something called a spontaneous awakening trial. This is being done more in adult population, but let's see what it is. And then you do a spontaneous breathing trial or an extubation readiness trial to be more specific. And if the patient has passed it, you extubate the patient. Let's see them one by one. How do you know the patient is ready to be weaned? Three main things to be assessed. First, whether the indication for ventilation has improved or not. You might have intubated the patient for a respiratory cause. Has the respiratory problem improved? It can be by any means. It can be by antibiotic therapy. It can be just you giving a rest to the patient's respiratory muscles and lungs. But if the primary cause has improved, then yes. Is the patient able to initiate a spontaneous breath? This you will definitely be able to see on your ventilator graphics with the help of your negative deflection in the waveforms. Is the patient adequately oxygenating with minimum support, minimum FiO2, minimum PWP? You can add a fourth one, which is hemodynamic stability. If all these four are there, then you can consider the patient to be ready for weaning. Also keep these things in mind. Suppose the patient is spiking a new fever. Then you must think of there is some other focus of infection. It can be in the lungs or extra, but again that's an extra burden the patient will have to face if you extubate. So that's not an ideal condition. If the patient is having a nutritional deterioration, electrolyte imbalance, a renal problem, underlying liver problem. So all of these are relative contraindications that will point towards a possible extubation failure that can happen. So attention should be given to correcting these extra abnormalities also. Remember, a high ventilation requirement for a pH which looks near normal, like above 7.25, is not a good indicator. If you extubate the patient, the chances of likelihood of a successful extubation is less. Similarly, on the other hand, if you have a dead space to tidal volume ratio less than 60%, this is associated with a better chance of the patient getting extubated. So now you see that overall already the primary cause is gone. The patient is oxygenating well with minimal support. Patient is hemodynamically stable, taking spontaneous breaths. What are the objective methods for you to consider weaning? What are the clinical criteria? If the patient is stable on a conventional mode of ventilation, and there you have not fiddled with the knobs, fiddled with the settings for the past 6 hours, then yes. If the mean airway pressure is less than 18, yes. FiO2 of less than 40%, yes. Tolerating a behavioral scale goal of -1 or 0, yes. Patient is having a spontaneous breathing, patient is not under a neuromuscular blockade, and underlying reason for intubation has resolved or is resolving, and it's in the improving trend. Those who require titration of ventilator settings for either over or under ventilation, or those who are still having an active disease process that requires you to monitor the patient very closely. Monitor in the sense monitoring, say, a carbon dioxide concentration or a tight titration of your carbon dioxide or your oxygen concentration. Then there is no point in you considering extubating the patient, because then you will lose that tight control. Okay. So these are the clinical criteria which will point towards the patient being good for weaning. There is something called as a spontaneous awakening trial, SAT. Okay, SAT is where all the sedators, analgesics which are used for the purpose of sedation are stopped up to 4 hours. But analgesics which are needed for active pain are continued. This is done every day. Okay, this is not just before you considering weaning, but as soon as the patient is stable, you might consider doing the spontaneous awakening trial every day. The pass is considered if the patient is able to open their eyes and respond to your verbal stimulus. They are able to follow with their eyes. Sometimes grasping hands is considered. So these are all suggestive that the patient is awake and the patient is understanding you. What is a failed spontaneous awakening trial? If they develop sustained anxiety, agitation or pain, there is increase in respiratory rate which is sustained. The SpO2 sats are dropping for 5 minutes or longer. There is an acute arrhythmia, 2 or more signs of respiratory distress. Then it means the patient is not yet ready to consider for weaning. Okay. So do not try to wean a patient who is having these symptoms. To put it in a nutshell, you will look at the mental status of the patient, cough strength of the patient, respiratory secretions, respiratory demand and cardiovascular status. So why? This is what we saw earlier also, right? So why mental status? Why cough strength? A patient who is having a depressed sensorium or a poor cough may not adequately, get their secretions out. They will not be able to protect their own airway. And these retained secretions, what they will do, they will plug the smaller airways, causing atelectasis of the alveoli that the airway is going to tend to. This will again result in decreased surface area for gas exchange and respiratory failure. If the patient is having demand, more demand for ventilation, as in a patient who is having a high grade fever or a patient who is having a severe metabolic acidosis, they will not be able to take care of their respiratory needs also once you extubate the patient. Already patient is having high demand on a ventilator per se. Now you are going to add on to the patient's work, metabolic work, by giving the work of breathing also. The patient will not tolerate that. Alright. So it's important for us to know whether the patient is ready before even considering to reduce the settings and reduce the support that you are giving. Alright. So how do you wean a patient who is on a volume control mode of ventilation? This is just an outline that I have taken from CHOP website, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, where if the patient is ready to be weaned, reduce the respiratory rate by 2 to 6 breaths per minute every 2 to 4 hours to normal respiratory rate for that age. Your aim should be to maintain enough end-tidal carbon dioxide, enough minute ventilation, even after reducing the respiratory rate. Pressure support, again you can reduce 2 to 4 centimeter of water every 2 to 4 hours to maintain enough target pressure support tidal volume of approximately more than 4 ml per kilos. Patient should not struggle or become hungry for more air just because you have reduced the pressures. That should not happen. Patients should still be comfortable with you weaning. PWP you can reduce by 1 to 2 centimeter of water every 4 to 8 hours, but maintain adequate oxygenation at lower FiO2 of 40% with SpO2 of more than or equal to 90%. This is in volume control mode. What about pressure control mode? Pressure control mode, again your respiratory rate pressure support will remain the same, similar to your volume control mode, whereas your PIP will be the one that you are setting, right? Because this is a pressure control mode. Your pressure or a PIP is what you are going to control. You can reduce it by 2 centimeter of water every 4 to 8 hours. Maintain a delta P to achieve a target tidal volume of 6 to 10 ml per kilos while maintaining adequate oxygenation as evidenced by a SpO2 of more than or equal to 90%, PaO2 of at least 60 millimeter of mercury with a FiO2 of less than 40%. Once you have reached these minimum values, then you can consider putting the patient for extubation readiness trial. When do you consider the weaning as a failure? See, suppose you are slowly reducing the settings every 2 to 4 hours or 4 to 8 hours. But suddenly patient has an increased need for FiO2 of more than 40% which is sustained for more than 6 hours. Or the patient develops a tachypnea or a tachycardia more than 20% increase from baseline. Asynchrony with a ventilator. There is increased work of breathing as evidenced by nasal flaring, accessory muscle use or retractions, or there is rise in end-tidal carbon dioxide or your blood gases or decreased minute ventilation. These are all suggestive that the patient is not yet ready to be weaned off the mechanical ventilation or weaned off the positive pressure support that you are giving. If you have a patient who is failing, find the reason, address the reason, and if it is going to be a reversible cause, reconsider doing the weaning in 6 hours. See, usual reasons for failure is you have not yet weaned the patient completely off sedation. What happens? You have a high level of sedation and the patient is not going to be initiating his or her own breaths. There will be decreased respiratory drive. There will be secretions the patient will not be able to clear, right? So, reduce the level of sedation. If the patient has had an hypotension or a hemodynamic status change, if the patient has been ventilated for a left ventricular failure, this is very common to happen. Again, we discussed why this happens because a positive pressure ventilation works as a left ventricular assist device for a patient in left ventricular failure by reducing preload, reducing afterload and improving the circulation overall. Fluid status, if the patient is fluid overloaded, consider diuresis. If the patient is having fever, that means there is increased demand. Try to find the underlying cause of fever, treat it and then think about weaning. New pneumonia, again similarly. So now if the patient is passing your weaning test and you are able to reduce the respiratory rate to around 15 to 20 and pressure support to around 10 with a PWP of less than 8. If you want to give a dexamethasone, yes, you can give, especially if the patient is at high risk for, post-extubation laryngeal edema, like a prolonged ventilation or multiple times re-intubations, injury has happened, you are suspecting. If the patient is ready, do a extubation readiness trial, which I will be discussing in a moment. If the patient passes, extubate within 6 hours. If the patient fails, then return to the previous settings and try your extubation readiness trial every day, every 24 hours. So to put everything together, child is on mechanical ventilation. If the patient has been ventilated for a procedure, then assert or assess your extubation readiness and extubate the patient. If the patient is patient is intubated for proper problem, patient has required mechanical ventilation for a longer time, longer stay in ICU, then wean parameters according to what we discussed earlier, provided the patient is weaning ready. Once the settings are achieved, try to do an extubation readiness trial. If the patient has passed, extubate within 6 hours. If the patient has failed, then return, return to the previous settings and try to do a daily trial of your extubation readiness trial. Suppose the settings you were not able to reach and due to some reason the patient has had a weaning failure, then pause the weaning, return to the previous settings in which the patient was comfortable, address the cause for weaning failure and re-evaluate in 6 hours. Now we will talk about extubation readiness trial. Now you have your patient in the lowest settings possible and you want to know if the patient is going to be able to breathe out of ventilator. So your aim in an extubation readiness trial is to simulate as much as possible the post-extubation conditions. Why? Because you need to know if the patient will be able to take on the load of breathing by themselves, and 2, whether they will be able to achieve the oxygenation and ventilation without the help of positive pressure support. Usually the duration of extubation readiness trial is somewhere between 30 minutes to 2 hours. There are broadly 2 types of ERT, T-piece trial and pressure support ventilation. What's a T-piece trial? T-piece is basically it's like a nasal cannula for ET tube, if you want to put it very simply. You remove the patient off the ventilator and connect this T-piece to the patient and give humidified oxygen. That's all you do in a T-piece trial. It's like post-extubation but just with the endotracheal tube. Note that there is no positive pressure here. Okay, you are just giving oxygen. There is no pressure support that you are giving through a T-piece. So what to monitor when you are doing this spontaneous breathing trial? You want to see if the patient is able to first initiate a spontaneous breath, maintain a spontaneous breath, the patient is comfortable or not comfortable. So how do you assess this? If the patient is becoming too tachypneic, requiring accessory muscle use, becoming hypoxemic, resulting in agitation or somnolence, or there is hemodynamic change, increased sweating, that means the patient is not ready. The patient is not ready to get off the positive pressure support. So the trial will be a failure. So these are all signs of impending respiratory failure, which means if the patient is having these signs and symptoms, patient will go for respiratory failure if you are extubating the patient. So signs of respiratory distress or failure, then it's a SBT failure or a ERT failure, reconnect the patient to ventilator. So it means the patient requires positive pressure ventilation to reduce the work of breathing. The only advantage here in extubation readiness trial is that you are not actually extubating the patient. Hence, if the patient fails also, does not matter, you can easily reconnect the patient back to a ventilator and there is no trauma of this re-intubation happening even if the test fails. The advantages and disadvantages are these. See, a T-piece trial may overestimate or underestimate the readiness. When will the T-piece underestimate readiness? See, the patient is connected to a long ET tube, endotracheal tube, right? So this endotracheal tube in a small baby means it's a small diameter endotracheal tube. That means there is more resistance. If the patient is unable to include this extra resistance into their work of breathing, it will look as if the patient will not be able to breathe outside ventilator, hence resulting in underestimation of readiness. Suppose the patient is having a laryngeal edema. So this is the normal larynx and the patient is having a laryngeal edema. And this is your ET tube. Let me put it in a blue color. Okay, so this is the ET tube. Basically, this ET tube is going to act like a stent, keeping the walls open. So what happens here? Actually, the resistance is reduced, isn't it so? The resistance is reduced compared to when the patient is not intubated, because this keeps the airway open. Your ET tube keeps the airway open. So in this case, it will look as if patient is ready to be extubated because patient is able to breathe through the ET tube. But once extubated, this laryngeal edema or the tracheal wall, which is already floppy, is going to collapse upon itself, resulting in a extubation failure. So ultimately, T-piece trial is where patient is disconnected from the ventilator. You connect oxygen, the oxygen will be delivered via the T-piece, endotracheal tube will remain in place, no positive pressure is provided, and it will tell you if the patient is able to breathe out of the positive pressure support. I'll talk about the scuff leak test in a moment, how to assess if the patient is going to breathe out of ET tube, where you want to overcome this overestimation of readiness. What about the other ERT? PSV, positive support ventilation or pressure support ventilation. Pressure support ventilation. So, pressure support ventilation is you simulating post-extubation conditions with the ET tube but adding a minimal pressure support. Remember that TPs did not have a pressure support, whereas here you are adding a pressure support. What is a pressure support ventilation? It's a patient triggered ventilation, pressure targeted and flow cycled, right? But the flow waveform, your tidal volume, the inspiratory times, expiratory time, all of them are going to vary as a measure of the patient's characteristics, patient's respiratory system, patient's compliance and resistance, patient's respiratory efforts. Okay. The advantage of PSV is that you will be able to definitely see the patient spontaneously initiating a breath. You will be able to see if there is more requirement for pressure by the patient on your graphical format on the screen, and external resistance of the ET tube so called will be overcome by the 5 centimeter of pressure support that you are going to keep. The interpretation that you will get out of this trial is that if the patient is able to achieve high tidal volumes or tidal volumes that are required for the patient with minimal pressure support, then that's equal to adequate respiratory effort from the patient and patient will be able to breathe out of ventilator. You will be watching out for rapid shallow breathing, and necessity for spontaneous breathing trial is low pressure support. Okay, so don't keep your pressure support at 10 or 15 and say patient is breathing spontaneously able to generate good volumes. No, when you are saying pressure support ventilation spontaneous breathing trial or your extubation readiness trial is a pass, it means that you have done this under a low pressure support setting. So, how does this low pressure work? See, this is a formula that we have been seeing, no? The flow is the difference between the airway pressure and alveolar pressure divided by resistance. So, to maintain the proximal airway pressure at set target, the ventilator will increase flow, thereby resulting in increased tidal volume. Okay. Low tidal volume with high respiratory rate is your rapid shallow breathing. Because ultimately what is your minute ventilation? Minute ventilation is tidal volume into respiratory rate. Patient was unable to achieve the high tidal volumes with the low pressure support that you are giving. So, to maintain the minute ventilation, patient is going to increase the respiratory rate. Correct? But this sustained increase of respiratory rate is not possible because patient will be fatiguing soon. Isn't it so? The continuous keep up of high respiratory rate is not possible. So, that will be the inference that you draw if the patient is having a rapid shallow breathing. Okay. So, it is not enough to say that patient tolerates a pressure support ventilation. A patient on pressure support ventilation with a low airway pressure setting must be able to achieve the adequate tidal volume while breathing at the normal respiratory rate or a reasonable respiratory rate for that age. Which is better? Now we saw two things, right? So we saw TP's trial and we saw pressure support ventilation spontaneous breathing trial. So actually both are equal. Okay, so in Farias et al, where they studied patients, around 400 babies they studied, I think. Okay, so where they saw that there was actually no difference in the extubation failures or the reason for reintubation being different in patients who underwent, in pediatric patients who underwent a TP spontaneous breathing trial and then got extubated, and pressure support ventilation and then got extubated. What about this cuff leak test? How do you know this endotracheal tube is not just acting like a stent? So you want to know whether the airway is going to remain patent after you have extubated, right? And we saw the reason for this earlier. So how are you going to do? Put the patient on a volume control mode. Normally what happens, the tidal volume that comes inside in the inspiratory limb should be equal to the volume that is going to come out in the expiratory limb. If the cuff is going to be inflated, then this is what is going to happen. If you are deflating the cuff, then that means there will be some loss of air around the endotracheal tube during exhalation. So, your expiratory limb will have lesser volume of air compared to that of your inspiratory limb. So, here you have a cuffed ET tube. This is the trachea through which air is going to go out during exhalation. Okay. In a deflated cuff, normally you have air going out through the sides. That means there is a leak. If there is leak, it means that there is space around the endotracheal tube, there is space in the airway is not blocked. Suppose there is a laryngeal edema, then there is going to be no leak here because air is unable to pass around the endotracheal tube. Okay. So, it means the patient might be having a narrow airway due to whatever reason, and the patient might go on to have a post-extubation stridor. In fact, post-extubation stridor is one of the most common causes of extubation failures. Are there anything else that can predict the success of weaning and extubation apart from your endotracheal extubation readiness trials? So, these are some of the predictors where you see at ventilatory muscle capacities, you look at ventilatory performance by means of minute ventilation, maximum voluntary ventilation, rapid shallow breathing index, respiratory rate. But none of them are, one, studied in detail in pediatric population, and two, not very sensitive or specific. The one thing that I would like to talk about is your rapid shallow breathing index, which is calculated as respiratory rate by tidal volume in 1 minute. If it's going to be less than 105, there's a high chance, and if it's going to be more than 105, there is low chance of the extubation being successful. So, this was actually devised as a screening test. Okay, no, it was not actually devised as a screening test. This was actually devised as a test by Dr. Yang and Tobin et al. To assess the extubation readiness. But later meta-analysis showed that again it was not that great in detecting a good outcome or a bad outcome. But still this can be used as a screening test with high sensitivity and low specificity. So, it can be used in early course of mechanical ventilation to recognize a patient who will be able to breathe on their own. For this low specificity, you can compensate that by using esophageal pressure trend measurements. That is present in most of the PICUs, I guess, at least corporate PICUs. No, I think I am digressing. Okay, let's come back to this topic. This volumetric capnography is another thing that's coming up recently. Volumetric capnogram is nothing but your EtCO2, your carbon dioxide concentration, that's plotted against the expired volume. Okay, and depending upon this, if your dead space will be calculated. If your dead space is going to be less than 0.5, then extubation success can be reliably predicted up to with 75% sensitivity and 92% specificity. If it's more than 0.65, then there is increased risk of extubation failure. When to say a spontaneous breathing trial has failed? We saw when weaning fails. When to say a spontaneous breathing trial or your extubation readiness trial has failed? Clinically, if the patient is having a respiratory rate of more than 35, paradoxical respiration, rise in blood pressure, use of accessory muscles, drop in saturation to 90%, there is anxiety, dyspnea, tachycardia or more than 20% from the baseline, or arrhythmia, or the patient is diaphoretic, then you can say the ERT has failed. Objectively, if you want, laboratory wise, if you want, if your carbon dioxide is going to be more than 10, meaning increase from baseline, okay, I am not talking about overall more than 10, or a drop in pH to less than 7.32, decline in arterial pH from the previous value by more than 0.07, PaO2 reduction to less than 60 millimeter of mercury, while the oxygen requirements or your FiO2 has gone up to more than 40%, and the SpO2 declines by more than 5% from the baseline value, then that means your extubation readiness trial has failed. These are the things that you are going to monitor in the half an hour to 2 hours that you are going to be performing your extubation readiness trial. So if the patient has failed, identify the reversible cause, correct the reason and redo the test every 24 hours to be assessing for your extubation. So that brings us to the next question. What are the causes of your extubation readiness trial failing? Either the respiratory muscles are unable to work properly, or the respiratory muscles are unable to handle the increased respiratory load that you are putting on the patient. These many days ventilation was doing this respiratory work, right? Now you are suddenly asking the respiratory muscles to do the work. So that's what happens. If the patient is having a decreased respiratory effort, either due to sedation, a brainstem lesion or a primary neuromuscular disorder, or even down below there's a cervical nerve injury or a phrenic nerve injury, or you have done something, critical illness, polyneuropathy, patient is having malnutrition, electrolyte imbalance, pain like in a flail chest, these can cause decreased respiratory effort. Increased load as in patient develops a increased demand as in a sepsis, as in a new onset infection, increased dead space due to some reason, and again similar to these can also increase the load of ventilation. Okay. So these are all causes of the patient failing extubation readiness trial. So try to address these causes if possible and then do retrial after 24 hours. So to summarize what we have seen so far, this is the same slide as earlier. Child is on mechanical ventilation. Assess the weaning readiness. If the patient is ready, wean the parameters in your control mode to the lowest setting possible. Once the setting is achieved, do a extubation readiness trial. If the extubation readiness trial is a pass, then extubate within 6 hours. If it's a fail, return to the previous settings and do a daily trial of extubation readiness. If you are unable to reach this setting due to some reason, there's a problem in you reducing the settings, reducing the pressure support, assess for weaning failure, see the causes, address the cause for failure and re-evaluate in 6 hours. Thank you guys for listening to me patiently. I know I have taken again 30 minutes. I am not able to reduce it below that. And thank you guys for staying with me so long with the ventilation series. I know I have not been touching upon any other topics in pediatrics apart from ventilation. But I hope this is useful to all of you as it was useful to me, and I got to learn a lot by doing this series on ventilation. Thank you all and all the best.